All right, welcome to the week 2 asynchronous session. Today we are going to be talking about narrative and memoir. So our objective today is to be able to use narrative elements in memoir. So as you have probably noticed as you're working through Unit 2 this week, we are beginning our Unit 2 project, which is the beginnings of our memoir. You will be working on the brainstorming and the planning sections of your memoir this week in Unit 2, and then next week in Unit 3 is when you will actually write the memoir. So we're going to go through a few elements of the project today that you will need to grasp to begin working on the planning stages of that memoir. What is important to recognize is that you are writing a memoir, which is also a narrative. So my first question that I'm going to pose to you, and you're going to answer this for me below also in the quiz, is what is narrative? Narrative is basically a text that tells a story. So last week we talked a lot about informational text in our sessions, and we talked about how that informational text is utilized to persuade or inform. Well, narrative is the other option for purpose. It is to entertain us. So when you think about narrative, you think about stories. And the first thing that comes to mind is fictional stories, short stories, novels, etc., plays, and these are all a lot of times fictional, the stories that people have made up to tell. Well, the difference between that type of narrative and the type of narrative that you are going to tell is that your narrative will be nonfiction. So we talked a little bit about nonfiction last week too when we were discussing informational text, but this nonfiction narrative that you will be writing is going to be because you're basing your narrative off something that has happened to you. So when you think about the definition of narrative, which is a text that tells a story, you will be telling a story about something that has happened to you. Now, I don't want you to think that you're writing an autobiography because you're not. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between autobiography and memoir. They have a lot of things in common. For example, they're both told from the first person perspective because the person who experienced the story is the one telling it. So in memoir, you're telling the story from the first person, and you're telling the story from the first person in autobiography as well. So those things are similar. They're both nonfiction. They're both based in reality. So that's the secondary element of what they have in common. Where they're different is in the fact that memoir is telling you about a snapshot of somebody's life. Or autobiography is telling you about, hey, I was born here, and then I grew up here, and this is what my parents did for a living, and these are all the things that happened to me throughout my life, and now I'm 65 years old, and this is where I am. You aren't doing that. You're not going to write to me about the day that you were born all the way up through today at Primavera. You are going to choose an experience that happened in your life, a snapshot, which is what a memoir is. It identifies a time period or an experience or an event that was meaningful, and you hyper-focus just on that event. So let's take somebody like Michael Jordan, for example, or LeBron James, like some big basketball player. I'm going to go with Michael Jordan because I'm way more familiar with his career. So if Michael Jordan was going to write an autobiography, he would start from the beginning of his life, and he would tell, and he probably has written autobiography actually, but he would talk from the beginning of his life. I was born here, this is where I grew up, this is how I started playing basketball, these are the people that influenced me along the way. Then I played high school basketball, I played for University of North Carolina, then I went to the NBA, I played for the Bulls, I retired, I played baseball for a while, I came back to basketball, then I retired again, etc. So he's going to tell everything that happened in his life. If he were to write a memoir, he would choose one snippet of that whole timeline. So he would say, okay, my timeline starts here and it ends here. I'm going to choose just that time, like the year and a half or whatever it was that he played baseball. And he would just write about that little fragment of his life. That would be a memoir. Now, you are going to even narrow it down more because you are going to focus on an event that had life-changing impacts or had changed the way you thought about something or taught you something. It's going to have impacted you in some way. So I want you to start thinking about what that memory looks like. And then in the first step of lesson 6, which hopefully you've already completed since we're halfway through the week at this point, you are brainstorming different ideas for the memoir. So make sure you're not talking about your whole life. Make sure you're focusing specifically on an event that happened. All right, so there are a couple of questions below that you're going to answer. You're going to talk answer those few questions, and then you'll see me again.